Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome to another series here of GovCon365 Snacktime Snippets. I'm Mark Lahart and with me is Paul Skirpsky. Today we are going to share with you how to manage indirect rates here within GovCon365. And a couple of the areas we're going to discuss and talk about here with you is how to set up your indirect rates, as well as the capabilities related to allocations there. So without further ado, Paul.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Mark. So hello to everybody out there. And, again, thanks for joining us. Like Mark mentioned, today we're going to talk about your indirect rates, which inside of Dynamics 365 Business Central, the GovCon365 app, it's set up under your cost pool setup. So this is the area where your indirect rates will be defined. It's fully configurable. So if you've got some unique requirements there, the system is going to support, first of all, an unlimited number of indirect rates. And this is the place where both your final pools and any intermediate pool or service centers are set up. Step one for the setup is to define what your rate structure is. So in my demo example, I've got a single fringe pool, an overhead, and a G&A. But if you have either multiple overhead pools or fringe pools, that can be easily accomplished through the setup, as well as any type of service center. So whether that be, an IT service center, or maybe you have a facility service center, they can all be defined within the application. The only requirement during this initial setup is just for any intermediate pools to be in a sequence before the final pool that those costs are allocated into. I'm going to take you into my overhead pool to explain and demonstrate how a rate is set up. So step one, you can see under my process area in the application, you've got a setup for your pool cost and base. This is where we would define what accounts are included in that particular pool. So you can see the top line where pool is checked. These are the costs I'm accumulating as part of my overhead pool. In this example, all departments are included in that pool. If you had a scenario where you had both on-site as well as customer site overhead pools, you would have different department sets defining what departments are included in either the pool or base. Within that pool setup, you're going to see your overhead pool. And then from there, we define what specific accounts are included. So in this example, it's a range of accounts. So from 70,200, which is our overhead accounting and audit section, through 7,999, which is our final overhead account within our GL structure, all of those overhead costs are accumulated in that pool. Then account 91,500 is the portion of fringe that was loaded into overhead during step one, which was that fringe allocation. In that fringe allocation in my demo scenario, a portion of fringe was going direct to projects, a portion into overhead, and a portion into G&A. So that's where any tiered pool or service center, you'll see that setup where you define, what GL account the costs flow into to later be picked up. And then in my example, my overhead base is going to be my direct labor for each of those, any project where work is being performed. And that's how the system is going to calculate what amount of overhead goes into each project. It's the math behind what's in my pool, what's in my base. So based on the percentage of overhead for each project, it's going to get that percent of overhead costs. When we think about our that's going to be for our actual rate allocation. In terms of provisional, what would happen is whatever our provisional rate is in our demo setup, and you can see, we'll see our provisional rates throughout time, you're going to multiply whatever that provisional rate is times whatever is in our pool to determine what is the provisional allocation. The system is going to track provisional and actual throughout time. You'll also see, in your reports, you can run them based on provisional or actual. And then as it relates to our overhead, we could show indirects applied both to posted and unposted data. With the unposted data, we just use the provisional rate. And then with actual costs that have already been accumulated and processed through the system, we can show it using both actual and provisional. Then finally, you see a final rate, and this would be used for your final rate allocation, as well as we've got automation for your invoicing on any cost type work. This is the rate, once you get it approved from the government, that would be used for your final invoice or credit based on if you've over or underbilled the government throughout time. Our allocation setup is just going to define, once the costs are accumulated, how are they allocated, either out to projects in this scenario at both an actual and provisional rate, or are they going into a GL account, as such, where we talked about within the fringe pool, where a portion was going to direct labor and then a portion to overhead and G&A. So that's how we can set up those tiered pools within the application. And then finally, you'll see your actual rate throughout time directly in the system. So we'll see as it's accumulated month over month, where is our actual rate trending. Really, I think the message we want to get across is that the system can handle unique scenarios. It's all configuration based, and we can support, I guess I forgot to mention this, when we look at our pool cost and base. In this example, the base I mentioned was direct labor dollars, but we can have examples where our base is a non-financial measure. So whether it's square footage, or you could have head count be that base, you could have something that we would set up and we call a statistical account in the general ledger that allows us to do an allocation based on something other than a financial measure. Hopefully this helped you learn a little today about how indirect rates are set up and managed inside of Dynamics. If you'd like to learn more about the solution, feel free to reach out to us at GovCon365.com on the website, or we'll also provide our contact information for any questions. Thanks for joining, and please enjoy our other Snacktime Snippets.